This is an event I'll never forget. It happened 20 years ago when I was staying with my uncle. Let me tell you, I'm not the kind of person who encounters ghosts, but I've always been terrified of them ever since I was a kid. One day I had to drive my uncle through a busy intersection. As we approached the red light, there were several people in the intersection. Suddenly I heard a strange noise coming from behind us, like someone was tapping on a water jug. I kept driving, asking if anyone else in the car heard it, but no one responded. We drove on until we reached another red light. A pickup truck pulled up behind us, keeping a considerable distance. Then there was that tapping sound again, louder this time, like someone was knocking on the glass. Without much thought, I reached to lower the window, but my uncle quickly grabbed my hand, telling me not to open it, insisting we wait until we got home. After that, when the light turned green and we moved on, there was still that eerie tapping sound from behind for a while. I told my uncle I wanted to pull over and check what was causing it, but he urged me to keep driving. When we finally got home, I checked around the car but found nothing unusual. Even though my uncle, a military man, said he didn't believe in such things, I felt like deep down he shared my unease about it, even if he wouldn't admit to being afraid of ghosts. The next day, I had to travel to another city with my uncle. We took a flight, and upon arrival, a friend of his picked us up. My uncle decided to drop me off at a relative's house before heading to his seminar. He assured me it was okay to stay there alone until he finished his business in town. I didn't know much about the house. My uncle hadn't visited in a long time. All I knew was that the owner lived abroad, leaving it to her mother, who lived alone, struggled with arthritis, and couldn't move around much. There was also someone named Sarah, around 50 years old, who took care of her. When I arrived at the house, Sarah greeted me in the usual manner. Meanwhile, my uncle scoped out the surroundings, but I didn't pay much attention, engrossed in conversation with Sarah as I headed to the bathroom. After a while, I brought my belongings into the house, and my uncle turned to me, asking seriously once more if I was sure about staying there. I was too engrossed in chatting with Sarah and other things, so when my uncle asked if I was sure about staying there, I just brushed him off with a casual, "Yeah, I'll be fine." After that, my uncle got into his friend's car and drove off. About an hour passed when I heard a ringing sound. I checked my bag and found my uncle's phone in there. He called to say he had left it with me by mistake, but assured me it wasn't a big deal. He said he'd call back after his seminar and to expect his call, but he didn't anticipate any emergencies. He'd stick to the planned schedule and get in touch later. I replied with an okay, uncle. After we finished talking, I started exploring the house. On the left side was a large dance hall with big mirrors on every side. On the right was the garage, the scariest part of all. It was filled with shelves stacked with old stuff. Women's shoes, about 10 pairs of men's shoes, various items, and the most chilling part was the 7 or 8 mannequin heads with wigs on them, at least. It was a sight that sent shivers down my spine. The house on the left side had a large vestibule used for dancing, with big mirrors everywhere, reflecting everything, including oneself, and a mannequin used for dancing. It reflected up to 8 images due to the 8 or 9 mirrors. On the right was the garage, which was really eerie because it was filled with stuffed shelves, old women's shoes, old men's shoes, many pairs, dolls sculpted like children. But these dolls were missing limbs. They were armless dolls. After I finished surveying the house, I began to wonder where I should sleep that night. I remembered Sarah mentioning that upstairs were the shrine room and the guest bedroom. I went up and saw the shrine room first, meant for religious rituals, but it was strange. It was really weird, with peculiar gods from every religion. I mean every religion. Some of the deity statues on the shrine were in good condition, while others were damaged. If I were to sleep in this room, I felt a strange mix of fascination and unease, a lurking fear. So I decided to bring my stuff down, thinking of sleeping in the room with the mirrors. The mirror room, as I was told, had been rented out for dance rehearsals. There were 2 tall mannequins as tall as me. From any angle in this mirror room, I could see myself and the reflections from all 8 mirrors. So I ruled out sleeping in this room, which had been rented for dance rehearsals. Instead, it had been used by a dance teacher and her late husband, who had left these items behind after his passing. Now the room that was supposed to be my sleeping quarters was the central prayer room on the first floor. It had doors leading to it from all directions. On the right side, around the room's perimeter, were rows of beds, leaving me puzzled as to why there were so many surplus beds with sheets, blankets, and pillows fully stocked, as if expecting an influx of guests. However, upon closer inspection, it turned out that these beds were unusable as there were pictures of deceased individuals hanging above them, arranged in rows of 4. The first picture was of an old woman, likely the grandmother of the house's owner. The second picture was of the grandmother's son, who had succumbed to alcoholism. The third picture was of the grandmother's husband. As for the fourth picture in the row, I couldn't discern who it was. I was starting to feel increasingly unsettled and uneasy. I thought to myself that tonight was going to be rough. I tried calling my uncle, but there was no reception. He didn't have his phone with him. It was with me. Right now, I haven't encountered any ghosts, but the atmosphere around me is getting darker by the minute. I can't do anything and I can't make any calls. Tonight, I have no choice but to stay here. As for my paralyzed grandmother sleeping in the middle of that room, she sometimes falls asleep and wakes up intermittently, her body moving slightly. I made the decision to sleep beside her bed, thinking it was the safest option. At this moment, the area around the house is eerily quiet. After a while, Aunt Sarah, the caretaker, came to tell me that she needed to go out for a bit of errand. "I'll hurry back soon," Aunt Sarah said. "I need to go find my grandson on the other side." And with that, she left. I couldn't help but wonder why Aunt Sarah left me like this, but I had no choice but to let her go. All I could do was warn her not to leave me alone for too long. Now it was just me and my paralyzed grandmother in the house. I finished bathing just before dusk and hurried back to stay with Grandma. As time passed, it grew increasingly darker and more unsettling. It was almost 5 o'clock, and Aunt Sarah still hadn't returned. I didn't know what to do. Looking at Grandma, who was already asleep, and with the lights in the house flickering on and off, I realized I couldn't turn them on fully because many of the lamps were broken. The house was now almost entirely engulfed in darkness, with only a few dim lights flickering. I checked the clock again. It was almost midnight. Aunt Sarah still hadn't returned, and I didn't know what to do. I looked at Grandma, and in my heart, I thought she must rely on me if she's being haunted. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep due to exhaustion from the journey. Then I felt a jolt. I felt like I heard footsteps coming down from the stairs above. The sound of these footsteps. I'll remember it until I die. I remembered perfectly that it must be the heavy footsteps of a fat person coming down the stairs. The sound of footsteps on the wooden floor, slow. The sound of wood creaking softly, and I'm sure it must be a big fat figure. My heart began to race, but what terrified me the most was when I looked for Grandma, who was lying beside me on the floor. Grandma, lying there now, turned to look straight at me, but her eyes drifted, and then she smiled at me. I felt like I was already in a bad situation, and yet she was smiling at me. "Don't smile at me anymore." Her eyes drifted, and the sound of footsteps continued to descend the stairs, one step at a time. I shifted closer to Grandma's sleeping mat. The room where Grandma slept had a gap between the wooden door, which made me think of a wooden door with a gap underneath, about an inch wide, enough to see through, but not wide enough to make out much. I wanted to see what it was. I'll tell you, someone as scared of ghosts as I am usually imagines everything. Right now, I don't want to imagine anything. There's a gap here, and I want to take a peek. The sound of footsteps continued to come down, one by one, step by step. I felt myself shudder. I started to smell something foul, like the smell of a dead animal, salty like a carcass. I couldn't bear it. I still peered through the gap under the door. And then I saw it. The silhouette of a woman in a dress, along with feet. Damn, I knew right then and there that I was scared out of my wits. When you're scared, you fear everything. It's hot, cold alternately. You're sweating, trembling, your heart's racing non-stop. But I still gathered my courage and shouted out, "Who's there? Who's outside?" I shouted twice. Believe it or not, Grandma, who had hardly moved at all, reached out and grabbed my wrist. It's like she's telling me to stop screaming. It's like her heart is telling me to stop. Then she lifts a finger and points it towards the corner of her mouth, like she's gesturing sheesh, shish. Don't make loud noises. Don't make loud noises. She's doing that finger gesture, but she's not saying anything. In that moment, I'm terrified beyond belief. The smell and the footsteps are overwhelming every nerve in my body. My stomach hurts. It's aching and churning, everything all at once. The feet are still there. I can see them, a woman's feet. They're broken, swollen, and colored a sickly greenish black. Broken feet, like someone who walks barefoot without care. Then I hear the sound of a refrigerator door opening, but the fridge couldn't have opened. Yet I swear it's the sound of a real fridge door opening. Because if the fridge opened like that, I would have seen the light from the fridge shining through from the other room. But there's only the sound. Then there's the sound of chewing, like someone chewing food in their mouth, loud and repetitive. The woman's feet are still there, not moving. Still standing there? Now there's the sound of the fridge door closing, followed by footsteps heading towards another door. Like I said, Grandma's room where she sleeps is a circular room. There are multiple ways in and out through different doors. There's a sound going towards the back door. I don't know what to do, so I crawl towards that door and try to grab hold of it. I think to myself, spirits or ghosts probably don't have the strength to open doors from the inside. But I don't know. I don't know what to do. The room for the elderly is locked from the inside. I tried to hold on to that door to prevent the ghost from opening it. That's my plan. As soon as I grab hold of the door for a moment, I hear footsteps walking in another direction, heading towards the bed I mentioned earlier, where there's a picture of a dead person. The footsteps head towards that bed. In that moment, I decide I can't stay in this house anymore. I look around for the key. I can't remember where I put it. I search until I find it. Aunt Sarah still hasn't come. So I make the final decision and grab the key. I decide I have to go out through that door. The door I'm holding on to just now because I hear the footsteps moving in another direction. I have to go out through that door. Right now, the smell of decay fills the air. The stench of rot permeates the entire house. Grandma looks at me. I feel sorry for her, and in return, she seems to pity me. I'm just a visiting guest trying to find a way out. Sweat is pouring, soaking me completely. Now I'm screaming several times, but it's useless. The neighboring house is a rental, and there's no one there. This house is really far away from any other house. Once I grabbed the key, I ran straight out with sheer panic driving me. I haven't even opened the door yet. It's like in horror movies when it takes forever to open a door. Finally, when I manage to open it, this isn't even my house. I don't know how to open it. When I finally get the door open, I rush to the gate. The gate is even harder to open than the door because I don't know which key to use. This isn't my house either. I try several different keys. I cursed whoever left the keys so disorganized. Keys that aren't being used should be thrown away, leaving only the ones that work. I don't know what's discouraging me, but I peek around the back. I can't see clearly, but I know it's a woman with a child on her back. Definitely a woman. There's a tall, big, dark figure. I'm going insane, and the door won't open no matter how hard I try. I've been at this door for a long time, but it won't budge. I start crying and cursing. I manage to curse out whatever I can think of, as long as it helps release some of my frustration. But what's worse is that this house has a big mango tree. Mangoes are starting to fall, hitting me on the back. Once, twice. I turn around and see someone standing on the roof throwing mangoes at me. I almost wet myself. But at least I managed to open the door. I open it and run away without looking back. If I turn around, I might see it again because I hear laughter following me, like they're throwing small mangoes down at me. I conclude that I've been hit by mangoes about 4 to 5 times, and I know this because the naturally fallen mangoes collided with the ones thrown at me. The impact felt different. I was definitely hit.
I ran as fast and as far as I could, not looking back.
Shoes weren't on.
Just a tattered shirt and shorts on one leg. I ran hundreds of meters until I found a big convenience store open at night.
So I asked to sleep in front of the store. I dozed off and on until morning.
Around 3 in the morning, I remember Aunt Sarah coming back, holding a bottle of whiskey. I smelled alcohol on herself, reeking. I knew right then why Sarah had to drink. If Aunt Sarah didn't drink, I figured she wouldn't really be living in that house. I sat at the shop until I fell asleep.
The clothes were old, shoes missing.
I sat there until morning, until I was shaken awake. Someone brought food for me. They probably thought I was homeless, just by the way I looked. I sat there until 6 in the morning, until it was bright.
I sat without a care in the world.
Once it was fully light, I went back to get my clothes, packed up my things, said goodbye to Grandma, and left that house. The clothes I took out, I put on new ones from outside without changing inside the house.
Then I decided to buy a bus ticket and head back home.
I didn't wait for my uncle. After that day, I told my uncle about it, and he comforted me because he saw that I must have had similar experiences before. That house didn't seem like a good place to stay. It seemed scary. Even though he asked me twice, my luck was to be fooled by a ghost.
There were necessary events that led me to stay there. In summary, I came to that house, which was filled with old things, belongings of the deceased owners, collecting all sorts of things without knowing why.
Everything from the hospital, various belongings, even wigs. I couldn't guess where these things came from, or if they were from a spirit or a dead person. I guessed it was Sarah, who took care of sick grandmother, who must encounter these things every day. I felt sorry for her. She couldn't walk. Sometimes she'd recognize me. Sometimes she'd be scared. But now I heard she's passed away.
I didn't hear anything about this house. The reason I had to stay there was that my uncle went for military training, and I followed because I wanted to explore other cities.
As for staying in this house, it was because we were distant relatives of my uncle. My uncle hadn't been to this house in a long time. Nearby, there were only rental houses. No one lived there.
Further out was a bakery which only operated during the day. Even if I screamed, no one would help. It was like this house was isolated.
My uncle, being a military man, was more observant than usual. He kept asking me if I was okay, but I didn't pay much attention, just kept talking to Sarah.
I only started to realize when my uncle drove off, and I began to explore the house. That's all about me.
I think that's it.
I'm the kind of person who's likely to be haunted by ghosts.
Everything just worked out to make sure I was haunted that night.